The only thing better than one Gothic villain would be two Gothic villains. Especially if they fought to the death. Mostly kidding. Hello, I am back with another amateur sewing tutorial, and this time we're going goth because I've been too happy recently and I need to offset that joy with extreme darkness. So yeah, gothic fashion. With the dramatic silhouettes, dark colors, and incredible hairdos, there are so many things that make this style so freaking cool to me. I've always wanted to explore and make costumes in this realm, but I've also held myself back just literally due to fear and wondering if I can pull it off. But all of that fear went away with the help of some of my best friends in the entire world. Now, if you've watched my video where I made 7 spooky Christmas looks, those 7 looks were actually modeled by some of my best friends. And I don't live in the same city as them anymore, but a few weeks ago they planned a trip to come visit me, and it was so much fun. In that group, probably the biggest enjoyers of drag are me and Kirk. And we've always joked around about giving Kirk a drag makeover because they literally have a supermodel stature, cheekbones that can cut glass, and I'm not jealous at all. But anyways, before the trip, Kirk kind of mentioned to me that they were exploring a more gothic aesthetic / style, if you will, and that kind of planted the seed in my mind that it would be really cool to do a gothic photo shoot as a drag duo. But I didn't really have a distinct vision for it. That is until I went to a garage sale and found these medieval knight costumes for like 15 bucks each. I looked at them and pretty much was instantly like, these are gonna become gowns, Kirk and I are gonna model them, and it's gonna be a blast. So then I asked the group, can we save a night of the trip to put Kirk in drag? And they were all for it, so we had a plan. Now I just had to get these damn costumes together, starting with the design. So there were 2 main challenges with designing this look. 1, I was using existing costumes designed for men, so I had to feminize them. And 2, I needed to make 2 costumes, so they had to complement each other. As a reminder, these are what the original costumes look like. They're nice coats made of red and black velvet with a lot of decorative elements like metal discs, pink trim, fringe, etc, etc. Since they were surprisingly well made, I did do a check to see if I was destroying something actually valuable by modifying these costumes. The tags on the inside of the costumes indicated that they were made by the Ward Stilson Company in Anderson, Indiana, and I looked up the company on a website that told me these costumes were probably made in the 1900s. And since they were in pretty tattered condition, I was at peace with making a mess out of them. I'm sure someone is rolling in their grave seeing me destroy a costume like this, but sorry, you're dead. Back to the coats though, my plan was to take away some of the decorative elements like the metal discs. That way the coats would look simpler, and after doing that, they would look something like the drawing here. And this is the perfect base to add onto for creating a full gown. But the question becomes, how do we make 2 complementary gowns out of these coats? And to solve that problem, I started with one key principle. Whatever element I wanted to add to one gown, I would try to carry over to the other gown to create cohesion. So the first thing I added to both gowns was just a tiered skirt. To add some length, some drama, and make it a bit poofy, you get it. Also, I added some ruffles onto the sleeve ends for the same sort of flair and drama. Then I decided to cover the red waistbands and make them black, just so that there weren't as many layers of color since I needed height and color blocking has a bit of a shortening effect. The next element I decided to carry over both gowns were black roses. I added them to the shoulders of both coats to soften the harsh seam lines on the arm, and then I added more onto one of the coats to cover up this strange zigzag pattern at the bottom of it. At this point, it was becoming obvious to me that there was more that I needed to cover on one dress than the other, so I got to thinking, what if I gave the more covered gown a more regal vibe and gave the simpler gown a more sultry vibe? So the next few elements I decided to make all out of the same fabric to maintain that cohesion I was talking about, but the elements themselves would be a bit different to give the gowns a bit of contrast. On the more royal gown, I decided to add puffy sleeves to soften the shoulders, and on the simpler gown, I achieved the same effect with a dramatic collar and added some hip ruffles to accentuate the hourglass shape. Finally, for the necklines, I gave the more regal gown a ruffle top for a more conservative yet dramatic feel, and just a black bra for the sultry gown for that revealing, flirty fantasy. Alright, now that that's out of the way, time for sewing. The first thing I had to do was use a seam ripper and remove all of the metal discs from the coats, and I ended up with something like this. Then I tucked in the collars and sewed that in place to open up the chest area. And after that, I added some waist darts just to feminize the coats and create that hourglass figure. So once all that was said and done, the coats looked something a bit like this, and we had the perfect base to create the roses. So I made some roses out of black satin ribbon. I cut the strips of ribbon into about meter-long pieces and then burnt the edges to prevent fraying. Then what I did was run these ribbons messily through the sewing machine to create ruffles and use hot glue to roll up one side of the ribbon together, thereby creating roses. And I didn't just do that out of satin ribbon. For textural contrast, I made some out of canvas, tulle, and a variety of other materials, and they looked very pretty. After that, I hand stitched the roses to the shoulders of the gown so that they would look something a bit like this. And then to add the roses onto the front of the regal dress, I also did a good amount of hand stitching. Now it was time to move on to the sleeves. For the ends of the sleeves, I stitched a bunch of tulle ruffles onto the sleeve so that it would create a bit of a flaring effect. And then to cover those ruffles up, I used a strip of black satin. On one end of the strip, I hemmed it, and on the other end, I just ran it messily through the sewing machine to create ruffles. After that, I hand stitched the ruffle side onto the sleeve, and they looked pretty damn nice. After adding those flared sleeves onto both dresses, I decided to make the puff sleeves on the more regal dress. To achieve that effect, what I did was take a rectangular piece of black satin, and I kind of folded the longer ends on the wrong side and sewed them together to create a channel on each of the longer sides. Then I took a smaller rectangular piece of black satin that matched the size of this folded piece. I put the two pieces right sides together and sewed the pieces together on the longer sides. The next thing I did was haphazardly mark off some diagonals on the wrong sides of the fabric and stitch the ends of the diagonals together. I did this because puff sleeves don't look smooth like beach balls. There's actually a bit of texture sewn into the fabric like you see here. And that's to give it a bit of dimension and visual interest. So once that was done, I fed some elastics through the channels that I made, which you can see here marked off at the ends with safety pins. Then I flipped everything inside out, sewed the ends of the elastics together, stuffed them, and sewed the open ends of the black satin tubes shut so that the stuffing wouldn't leak out. What I basically created here was a puffy bracelet that I could actually push all the way up my shoulder to act as the puffy sleeve. And you can get a sense of what that looks like here when I put it on the dress form. A bit of a shortcut, I'll admit, but hey, I forgive myself. Moving on to the more sultry dress, I set out to add the hip ruffles. The way I did that was to cut out some pieces of fabric that looked like fanny packs on a piece of felt and 2 pieces of black satin. Then I sewed one of the felt pieces directly onto the back side of the black satin pieces to basically serve as interfacing in order to add some structure to the petals. Then I took the 2 satin pieces and sewed them together right sides facing. I clipped the curves, flipped the whole thing inside out, and I stitched the ends closed. The final pieces looked like this, and I was able to hand sew them onto the sultry jacket to give that nice little hip curve. Oh, and just like the regal jacket, I sewed on the black waistband here to cover the red waistband as well. Moving on to the collar, I cut out the shape of a sort of trapezoid, and then I sewed a ton of wires onto the trapezoid to allow the collar to stand up. To make sure the wires didn't show or poke out, I covered them in felt and sewed the 2 felt pieces together at the edges. Then I cut out 2 more pieces of black satin in the same shape and arranged them in this order you see here. That way when I sewed them together, I could effectively flip the whole thing inside out, sew the bottom closed, and add elastic so that you could feed your arms through the ends of the collar. The last thing to take care of here were the skirts. For that, I cut 2 large pieces of what looked like, you know, a donut? Imagine you took a small slice out of a donut and then made it 20 times bigger, and that's what I cut out on fabric. And then I marked out a bunch of lines on the fabric, and those lines served 2 purposes. One, it helped match the lines when I sewed 2 of the donut pieces together to create the base skirt. And 2, it marked off where I would need to add all the ruffles that would add the body to the skirt. So most of the ruffles were made with tulle, but some of them were made with long strips of black fabric, 3 per skirt to fall gracefully over the tulle ruffles and give that tiered effect. So you can kind of see here the sewing process. 7 layers of tulle followed by a layer of black fabric to serve as the fluffy bottom tier, then 5 layers of tulle followed by a layer of black fabric to serve as the mid tier, and then 3 layers of tulle. I did not attach the layer of black fabric that served as the top tier because I decided to sew that along with the skirt directly onto the coat to complete the skirt. And the final effect looks something like this. And you know what? I definitely wasn't mad at it. Now, in terms of accessorizing the look, there was literally no point to bracelets, so we just kind of skipped it. But for the real gown, I had to make a ruffled top. To achieve that, I took an old t-shirt, cropped it, and sewed tulle ruffles all over the shirt so that I could wear it underneath. And I also opted to wear some big scrunchie that somehow fit over my head as necklaces to add even more decorative flair to the neck area. For the sultry gown, I just took a cheap bra and a corselet here, I'm not gonna lie. And I also got this beautiful necklace with fuchsia jewels and colored it with black Sharpie to match the rest of the gown. The necklace didn't have to be too elaborate here because we really wanted the collarbones to be exposed on the final look. As for the hairstyles, it's just giving messy witch. I used the wig from my dragon fruit video as the simpler wig for the sultry gown, and a similar, more dramatic wig for the regal gown, since the emphasis of that gown was going to be its exaggerated effect. Now for the final reveal. In kind of discussing with my friend Kirk if they wanted to be the regal queen or the sultry queen, I could tell that they were leaning towards the more sultry vibe, and I was more than happy to give that to them. Again, they're basically a supermodel, so they rocked it better than I could have ever imagined, and it was so cool to see. And once we got in full drag, we had this super cute moment where I was able to adorn Kirk with their necklace and basically be like, honey, you are a drag queen now. And it was so cool. I genuinely think seeing your friend in drag is such a unique but fantastic experience that you will never forget. I highly recommend it. Finally, there was one last thing to do, and that was to give the gal a name. Now, this is not a read, but Kirk is a lot like Lady Gaga in the sense that they are distinctly Italian, and it comes up frequently in conversation, especially when it comes to food. So since we've talked about putting Kirk in drag so many times now, I've always been like, Kirk, if you ever get in drag, your drag name should be Garlic. And so here you can see BXL and Garlic serving at the function, giving you drama, theatrics, gothic, darkness, villainy, evil, never the same, unafraid to reference or not reference, you get the point. Overall, I gotta say, this experience was so incredible. And I can't believe that it was inspired by my best friends and like a couple of $15 garage sale costumes. I think the transformation was pretty freaking amazing, but not as amazing as my friends. This is gonna sound so cheesy, but to have people around you that are so supportive of your wildest visions literally changes everything. And it wasn't just Kirk. My friends Charmaine and Haidao also stayed up super late to like take photos and help with direction, and I literally can't get over how blessed I am to have like such incredible people in my life. It's kind of funny to think that something as dark as a gothic photo shoot actually created so much joy. And it turns out going out of your comfort zone can be pretty rewarding and gorgeous. Hopefully you can take this as a sign to reach out to your friends and do something that is outside of your comfort zone together. On that note, thank you so much for watching. Please like, subscribe, and ring the bell notification. And as always, go big, be larger than life, be XL.